Hello everyone. Before the story start, tell me where are you watching from and what time is it?
The insomnia had carved a new world out of the night, a world of slow hours and hyper-alert silence. My walks began as a desperate measure, a way to outpace the restless thoughts circling my bedroom. I'd leave my apartment around 3 a.m., when the city was in its deepest narcotic sleep, and walk with no destination. The route was always the same, a 2-mile loop through a grid of quiet residential streets lined with old, towering oaks and sleeping craftsman homes. The streetlights here were the old sodium vapor kind, mounted on wooden poles, each one casting a perfect, buzzing dome of orange light onto the pavement below. They were spaced about 50 yards apart, so my journey was a rhythmic passage from one pool of warm, humming light to the next, with brief stretches of soft, moonlit darkness in between. For weeks, it was just a walk. The lights were on timers, or light-sensitive switches. They were constant. Then, one night, I noticed the sequence was wrong. I was halfway between two lamps, in the deepest part of the interstitial dark. Ahead, the next light in the sequence was off. Its pole was a dark skeleton against the starless sky. I kept walking, my footsteps the only sound. When I was about 10 feet from the darkened lamp, it clicked on. Not with a hesitant flicker, but with a sudden, decisive thump of ignition, flooding the circle of pavement before me in that familiar orange glow. I stopped, startled. It felt considerate. Like a sensor light welcoming me home. But these were public lights, not motion-activated. I looked back over my shoulder. The light I had just passed under, the one that should have been shining steadily, was now off. Its dome was a dead, black eye. A coincidence. A faulty batch of photocells, a weird power surge. I continued my walk. The next light, 50 yards ahead, was also off. As I approached within 10 feet, it thumped on, bright and warm. I glanced back. The light behind me had gone dark. My skin prickled. It was a perfect relay. One lamp would ignite to guide my way, and the one I left would extinguish itself, as if my presence was a switch, and the city was conserving energy by only illuminating the precise volume of space I occupied. The next night, I watched for it. Same time, same route. The phenomenon repeated, with machine-like precision. I was a bubble of light moving through a sea of darkness. The lamps didn't just turn on and off, they acknowledged me. The one ahead would awaken as I entered its sphere of influence, a sphere that seemed to be exactly my personal space. The one behind would die the moment I was fully within the glow of the next. There was no overlap. No soft edges. It was a binary state, light for my present location, darkness for my past. I became a connoisseur of the transition. The click of the light ahead was a gentle, hollow sound, like a giant finger snapping. The extinguishing of the light behind was silent, a swift, soundless dimming to nothing. The effect was one of profound isolation. The world existed only where I stood. Everything before me was potential darkness, waiting to be lit. Everything behind me was erased darkness, a cancelled reality. I was not walking through a city, I was painting it into existence with my footsteps, and unpainting it just as quickly. I tried to break the pattern. I'd stop suddenly under a light. The one ahead remained dark. The one behind stayed lit. The bubble held. I'd walk backwards. The light I was retreating from would stay on until I passed the midpoint, then the one I was backing into would ignite, and the former would die. The system was flawless, and it was centered on me. I ran. The lights kept pace, a wave of ignition and extinction matching my speed, never allowing a second lamp to be lit, never leaving me in the dark for more than a step. The city was choreographing itself around my solitary, nocturnal march. The terror was not in the lights themselves. It was in the metaphor. I was literally leaving darkness in my wake. I was a creature of erasure. Every step forward consigned the step behind to oblivion. My past was not just memory, it was nullified space. I began to feel a profound anxiety about stopping, about sitting down. If I ceased moving, would the bubble hold? Or would the light go out, plunging me into permanent dark, with no next lamp to trigger because I wasn't advancing? My movement was the only thing sustaining the light. I was a prisoner of momentum. One night, I brought a friend. I didn't tell him why, just that I needed company on my walk. Ben was a night owl, agreeable. We set out. The first light ahead was off. As we approached, it clicked on. "Weird," Ben said. "Faulty light." He didn't look back. The light behind us stayed on. It didn't go out. My heart leapt. It was broken. The spell was just for me. We walked to the next lamp. It was already on. And the one behind remained on. For Ben, it was just a street with some working and some broken lights. For me, the entire system had defaulted to a normal, static state. The phenomenon required my solitude. It was a private performance. When Ben left at his doorstep, I continued alone. The moment I was by myself, the relay resumed. Click. Darkness. Click. Darkness. It was mine again. The loneliness that followed was deeper than any I'd felt before. The world had a secret face it showed only to me in my absolute aloneness, a face that said I was a void, a walking negation, a consumer of light who left only spent darkness behind. Now, I can't stop walking. The loop is my life. I leave my apartment at 3. The lights welcome and dismiss me in their perfect, silent rhythm. I've tried different streets, different neighborhoods. The effect holds anywhere with old streetlights. I am a traveling singularity. Dawn is my only reprieve. As the sky pales, the lamps all click off in unison, their duty to me over, and I return to my apartment, exhausted, a ghost who only exists as a function between two darknesses. I am writing this on a bench under a lamp that is lit only because I sit here. If I stand to leave, it will go out, and the next one will guide me home. I realize the horror is not that the lights go out behind me. The horror is the implication that they were only ever lit for me in the first place. That the city, the night, the world itself, is just a set of props that assemble themselves around my passage, and dissolve when I'm gone. I am not a man walking through a city. I am a man around whom a city briefly, temporarily forms, a phantom infrastructure of light that collapses into nothingness in my wake, leaving no proof I was ever here at all. The first time I saw her, I thought my eyes were broken. It was late, the kind of deep, starless night that feels more like a substance than an absence. I was on the 3rd floor fire escape of my apartment building, trying to smoke away an anxiety that had claws. The alley below was a canyon of pure black, lit only by a single, flickering security light above a back door 2 buildings down. Its glow was sickly, intermittent, dying for seconds at a time before shuddering back to life. Into that unreliable pool of light, she walked. She came from the darker end of the alley, a slim silhouette. And she brought her own light with her. It wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't a reflection. It was a perfect, circular disk of soft, white gold radiance on the wet asphalt, exactly the size and shape of the light from a street lamp, but there was no lamp above her. The glow emanated from nowhere and everywhere, illuminating her from her ankles down, keeping pace with her steps. It moved with her like a loyal pet, a personal spotlight. When the building's security light flickered off, her private pool of light remained, constant and serene. When the security light stuttered back on, there were 2 circles on the ground, one harsh, electric yellow and jittering, the other smooth, placid gold, moving independently beside it. I froze, the cigarette forgotten between my fingers, burning down to the filter. She walked with purpose, not hurrying, her head down. The halo of light moved in perfect synchronization, illuminating the cracked pavement, a discarded bottle, the glitter of broken glass around her feet. It didn't cast her shadow, it seemed to erase it, or perhaps it was her shadow, inverted into light. She passed under the security light, and the two luminosities didn't mix. Her personal glow simply slid over the electric one, maintaining its own character. She reached the end of the alley, turned the corner, and was gone, taking her light with her. The alley returned to its fitful, lonely darkness. I convinced myself it was a trick. A reflection from a window I couldn't see, car headlights from a parallel street bent through some freak atmospheric lens. I went back inside, my heart rattling, and drank until the image blurred. I saw her again 3 nights later. This time, I was at street level, taking out the garbage. She was on the opposite sidewalk, under a perfectly functioning street lamp. And she still had her own pool of light. It was fainter here, competing with the electric orange from above, but it was unmistakable, a cleaner, whiter circle on the pavement within the larger, dirtier one. It made her seem detached, like a figure cut out from one photograph and pasted onto another. She was within the city's light, but not of it. She walked past a shop window, and her glow reflected back, a second ghost light moving in the glass. I stood, holding a reeking bag, utterly transfixed. She didn't look at me. She seemed unaware of her own extraordinary condition, or was so accustomed to it that it warranted no attention. I began to look for her. My insomnia found a new purpose. I'd patrol the neighborhood from midnight to 4, a stalker of the miraculous. I learned her rough schedule. She appeared mostly in the quiet hours, always walking, never lingering. She lived in the old converted warehouse at the end of my block, I deduced. And the glow was always with her. Indoors, I suspected, it was simply the normal electric light. But outside, under the open sky or the feeble public lamps, her personal radiance manifested. It was hers alone. No one else seemed to see it. People passed her without a second glance. A couple arguing on a corner didn't flinch as she walked by them, her feet in their private sunspot. I was the sole witness. The obsession deepened. What was it? A medical condition? Some bizarre bioluminescence? A spiritual aura made physically manifest? I started to document it with my phone's camera. The results were frustrating. In photos, she looked like a normal woman in a coat, walking down a street. The glow didn't register. It was for my eyes only. A private cinema between her and me. One rainy night, I finally got close enough to see the effect up close. She was waiting at a crosswalk, under a broken traffic light that cast no illumination. The rain fell around her in silver streaks, and on the ground, her circle of light was a perfect, dry oasis. The raindrops vanished the moment they hit the boundary of her glow, as if hitting an invisible, warm dome. Steam, faint and ethereal, curled up from the edges where the wet, dark pavement met her circle of dry, lit ground. She stood in a pocket of perfect weather. I was 10 feet away, soaked and shivering, watching her exist in a separate, kinder climate. Our eyes met. For the first time. She looked directly at me, and in her gaze, I saw no surprise, no alarm. Just a quiet, infinite sadness, and a recognition. She knew I could see it. She gave a barely perceptible shake of her head, a warning, or a plea, then the walk signal changed, and she stepped off the curb, her dry, luminous circle moving with her across the glistening, black street. That look broke something in me. It shattered the clinical curiosity and replaced it with a raw, desperate longing. I didn't want to study her anymore. I wanted what she had. I wanted my own pool of light. I wanted to walk through the cold, uncaring night with a personal sun at my feet, to have my own atmosphere, my own rules of physics. The envy was a physical ache. Last night, I followed her. Not discreetly. I walked behind her, matching her pace, staying just outside the edge of her glow. She knew I was there. She didn't speed up or turn around. She led me to the river walk, a deserted concrete path along the industrial waterway. Here, there were no streetlights at all. Only the distant, hazy glow of the city on the clouds, and the deeper black of the water. And her light. It was brighter here, unchallenged. It cast the texture of the concrete into sharp relief, gleamed on the chain-link fence. It was beautiful. It was the most beautiful, lonely thing I had ever seen. She stopped at a bench that overlooked the sluggish, dark river. She sat down. Her pool of light settled around the bench, a neat, illuminated island in the vast dark. I stood at the edge of the light, my toes touching its circumference. I could feel it. A gentle warmth emanated from it, cutting the river's chill. A smell, too, not perfume, but the clean, sun-baked scent of dry stone, of a summer morning, utterly alien to this damp, metal-scented night. Why? I asked, my voice a harsh scrape in the quiet. Why do you have it? She looked out at the water, her profile serene in her own gentle luminescence. I don't have it, she said, her voice low and melodic. It has me. It's not a gift. It's a condition. A condition of what? Of being alone, she said, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes held that same bottomless sorrow. Truly, permanently alone. It's the light that fills the space where another person's attention should be. It's the warmth that substitutes for touch. It's my own atmosphere, because I can no longer share anyone else's. She looked down at the circle of light around her feet, a prisoner regarding her cell with tragic affection. It grows brighter the more isolated you become. It's very bright now. I took a step forward. My foot entered the circle of light. The warmth was immediate, soothing, like stepping into a sunbeam on a cold day. I felt a dizzying sense of peace, of absolute, unassailable safety. This is what I wanted. This was the answer. She watched me, her expression unreadable. If you stay, she whispered, it will start to grow for you, too. And yours will push mine away. We can't share it. It doesn't work like that. I didn't move. I stood with one foot in her light, one foot in the cold, real dark. I felt the pull, the seductive, welcoming heat. To never be cold again. To never be unseen. To carry your own perfect, dry, bright space wherever you went. I looked at her face, etched with a loneliness so profound it had become its own energy source. And I understood. The glow wasn't a halo. It was a cage. A beautifully lit, perfectly climate-controlled cage. To step fully into my own light would be to step fully out of the world, out of the messy, shared, sometimes painful experience of connection. I pulled my foot back. The cold of the night rushed in, shocking and brutal and real. She nodded, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. She stood up, her light adjusting instantly. She walked away, back along the path, her personal dawn moving with her, a solitary star in a black firmament. I watched her go until she was just a dwindling point of gold in the distance, and then nothing. I stand here now, in the unmitigated dark, cold to my bones. I can still feel the ghost of that warmth on my right foot. I am alone. But I am in the world. And she is in her light. And the space between us is the darkest thing I have ever known. I know now that I will see her again, walking her solitary rounds. And I will feel that envy, that terrible pull. But I will also know the cost of the glow. And I will stay in the dark, where I can still, perhaps, feel the touch of another, even if it's just the cold, indifferent rain. The city had a new heartbeat after midnight, and it was the low, electric hum of vacancy. My job ended at 11, a shift manager at a copy shop that smelled of toner and quiet desperation. The walk home was my decompression chamber, 15 blocks through a part of downtown that was half revived, half relapsed. Glossy new coffee shops stood next to pawn shops with windows like clenched teeth. But in the dead hours, they were all just dark fronts. Except for the signs. Neon signs. The old kind, real glass tubes bent into cursive scripts and simple icons, bolted to brick above doorways. A shoe repair shop with a giant, neon high heel. A barbershop with a twisting, candy cane pole of light. A diner with a steaming coffee cup. During the day, they were quaint, nostalgic. After hours, they were dark, inert sculptures. Until I passed them. It started with the high heel. I'd walked past Sal's Soul Salvation 100 times. Its sign was always off at night, a dead pink outline against the brick. One Tuesday, lost in a fog of spreadsheets and petty office politics, I didn't even look up as I approached. I was parallel with the doorway when a sharp, buzzing ZZZT split the silence, and a pink, humming light washed over me. I flinched, whirling around. The neon high heel was alive, blazing, casting a garish glow on the wet sidewalk. It hadn't been on a second before. There was no one else on the street. No motion sensor pinged. It had lit for me, at the exact moment of my passing. I stood there, heart hammering, staring at the sign. It buzzed aggressively, insistently. After 30 seconds, as I took a step back, it snapped off. Not a fade. A death. One moment a vibrant pink screen, the next, cold, dark glass. A freak timer. A short circuit. I hurried home, the image of that sudden, personal illumination burning behind my eyes. 2 nights later, it was the barber's pole. I saw it ahead, dark and silent. A wave of irrational dread washed over me. I slowed my pace. I watched it. As my shadow, thrown by a streetlight, first touched the edge of its lightless sphere, the red and white tubes ignited with a chorus of angry pops and hisses. The spiraling light began to turn, throwing swirling shadows around my feet. It was a celebration, or an alarm. For me. I stopped walking. The pole continued its manic spin. I took a step back, out of the zone where my shadow had touched. The sign sputtered and died mid-rotation. The street was silent again, save for the distant wail of a siren. This was no coincidence. The city was greeting me. Or it was announcing me. I began to experiment. I'd vary my route, my speed. The result was always the same. The signs only reacted to my direct, immediate presence. Not to cars, not to the occasional other pedestrian, who walked under dark, silent signs, oblivious. Just me. The trigger seemed to be a combination of proximity and attention. If I stared at a dark sign as I approached, willing it to stay off, it often would, until the last possible second, when it would flare to life with a sound like shattering glass. If I tried to sneak past, looking away, it would often snap on a fraction earlier, as if offended by my indifference. The glow from the signs was different. It wasn't just light. It had texture, temperature. The high heel's light felt cheap and warm, like spilled perfume. The barber pole's light was cold, clinical. The neon open of a long-shuttered bakery flickered a sickly yellow that smelled, impossibly, of stale sugar and mildew. The light didn't just illuminate the street, it painted it with the essence of the dead business below. I was a ghost, walking through a cemetery of commerce, and my passing was raising the spirits of the signs. They were remembering themselves through me. The worst was the old Paradise Hotel. It wasn't a hotel anymore, just a boarded-up shell with a magnificent, complex sign running the length of its facade. It depicted a palm tree, a setting sun, and the word paradise in flowing, tropical script. Most of the tubes were broken or missing, a skeleton of a dream. I always crossed the street to avoid it. One night, heavy rain forced me to stay on its side for the awning. I hurried, head down, under the corpse of the sign. I was directly beneath the broken palm tree when the sign exploded into light. Not all of it. just the parts that touched me. A single, jagged segment of the palm tree's trunk, right above my head, buzzed and glowed a poisonous green. The P and the A in paradise flickered on, stuttering, casting a leprous light on the pouring rain around me. The rest of the sign remained dead. It was lighting up in pieces, only the pieces directly over me. I was a human brush, painting the dead sign back to life with my presence, one sickly stroke at a time. I ran. The lit segments died behind me, block by block, as if my wake was extinguishing them. I fell into my apartment, soaked and shaking. This wasn't greeting. This was diagnosis. The city was sick, and I was the fever that made its symptoms visible. I quit my job. I couldn't take the walk anymore. But I couldn't afford to move. I became a prisoner of daylight. I'd stare out my window at the sleeping signs, knowing what they could do, what they waited for. The knowledge was a rot in my mind. Last night, I had to go out. An emergency. The pharmacy. It was 1 a.m. I took the most direct route, a gauntlet of silent, watchful neon. I walked like a man in a minefield, tense, barely breathing. I passed a dark sign for a defunct insurance agency, a neon handshake. It stayed dark. A small victory. Then a shoe store with a neon boot. Dark. My heart dared to hope. Maybe it was over. Maybe I was cured. I reached the glowing green cross of the 24-hour pharmacy. It was already on, of course. A real, functioning business. I did what I needed to do, my hands trembling as I took the bag. The relief was immense. The walk home would be okay. I stepped back onto the sidewalk. And the city answered. It wasn't one sign. It was all of them. Every dead neon sign on the block, on both sides of the street, for as far as I could see, ignited in a simultaneous, deafening cacophony of buzzing, popping, and sizzling. The high heel, the barber pole, the bakery, the insurance handshake, the boot, the shattered palm tree of the paradise, all of them blazed into furious, colorful life. The street was transformed into a carnival of the dead, a riot of remembered light, all focused on me. The combined glow was blinding, painting the wet pavement in a lurid, screaming palette. The hum was a physical pressure, vibrating in my teeth, my bones. They were celebrating my return. Or they were finally, fully seeing me. I stood paralyzed in the center of the roaring, electric cathedral they had built for me. And as I stood there, I realized the light wasn't just around me. It was starting to stick to me. A faint, greenish aura from the pharmacy cross clung to my jacket. A pink tint from the high heel shimmered on my hands. I was being painted by their memories, stained by their long-dead purposes. I ran. I ran through the tunnel of screaming light, and as I passed each sign, it didn't go out. They stayed on. The entire street remained illuminated in my wake, a permanent, garish monument to my passage. I can see the glow from my window now, coloring the night. They're still on. They've never stayed on before. I have awakened something. Or I have finally become something they recognize, a patron, a catalyst, a permanent resident of their electric, longing memory. The city is awake now. And it's watching me with 1,000 glass eyes, waiting for me to walk again, so it can light my way, forever. The apartment was a long box of shadows, a railroad flat where the only true light lived in the kitchen at the far end. A single, bare bulb hung on a frayed cord over the sink, controlled by a pull chain that clicked with a sound like a breaking bone. It was a miserable light, a cold, clinical white that bleached color from everything and cast deep, unforgiving shadows into the corners of the living room and bedroom. But it was my light. After the sun set, it was the only thing that stood between me and the utter blackness that pressed against the windows. My routine was a religion of economy. I'd come home from work, move through the dark rooms by memory, and only when I reached the kitchen would I reach up, feel for the cold metal bead at the end of the chain, and pull. Asterisk click. Asterisk the world would snap into harsh, electric focus. I'd make dinner, eat standing at the counter, wash my single plate. Then, before retreating to the dark cave of my bedroom, I'd reach up again. Asterisk click. Asterisk darkness would swallow the kitchen, and I'd feel my way back down the hall, the afterimage of the bulb burning a blue ghost on my retinas. The change was so subtle it was almost not there. It was a Tuesday. I'd finished washing up. My hand was raised, fingertips brushing the chain. I paused. A thought snagged, a unpaid bill, a awkward conversation I'd have tomorrow, the sheer weight of the silence in the apartment. It was a pause of maybe 2 seconds. Just a hitch in the rhythm. And in that pause, the light waited. It didn't flicker. It didn't dim. It just held. The quality of the illumination changed. It became expectant. It was as if the light was a living thing that had been performing a simple task, illuminating, and had suddenly become aware of me, the operator. It was listening for the click. It was holding its breath. My own breath caught in my throat. The moment stretched, thin and taut. I yanked the chain. Click. The darkness that fell was instant and total, but it felt different too. It felt like a release, like the light had exhaled. I told myself it was my imagination, a trick of a tired mind projecting agency onto a simple circuit. But it happened again. And again. Any time I hesitated before turning the light off, the phenomenon occurred. If I pulled the chain decisively, the light died obediently, a passive servant. But if I paused, even for a heartbeat, the light would seem to solidify, to become attentive. The shadows under the table would stop their faint, vibration-induced shimmer. The faint, almost inaudible hum of the filament would seem to quiet, not cease, but become a focused silence. The light was holding still. For me. I began to test it. I'd stand under the bulb, my hand on the chain, and count in my head. 1 1000, 2 1000, at 3 seconds, I could feel it. The shift. The light was no longer just illuminating the room. It was observing the room. Observing me. It was like the difference between a blanket lying on a bed and a blanket being held up, poised to fall. The potential energy was palpable. The fear wasn't of the light. It was of the suspension. Of that moment when the world paused on the hinge of my decision. In that moment, anything seemed possible. The light might not go out. It might get brighter. It might change color. It might speak. The pause gave it a terrible kind of life. I started rushing the ritual. I'd fumble for the chain, pull it quickly, and scramble out of the kitchen before the afterimage faded. But the more I feared the pause, the more I seemed to create it. My hand would falter. My mind would go blank. And I'd be trapped again in that silent conference with the bulb, both of us waiting for me to make the next move. Then, it started happening with other lights. The dimmer switch in my bedroom. If I turned it down slowly, smoothly, the light would fade as commanded. But if I hesitated halfway, the dimming would stop. The light would hold at that exact level of gloom, waiting, until I either continued turning or snapped it off completely. The streetlight outside my window, which usually flickered on at dusk with a dull thump, one evening stayed dark until I looked directly at it from the darkness of my room. As soon as my eyes focused on its pole, it ignited, as if my gaze had thrown the switch. Light was becoming responsive. Interactive. It was developing a relationship with my intention, and it was most sensitive in the gaps, the hesitations, the moments of my uncertainty. The kitchen bulb remained the heart of it. Last night, I broke. The day had been a catastrophe of small humiliations. I stood under that bulb, feeling its sterile white light like a judgment. I wanted it gone. I reached up, my fingers closing around the chain. And I froze. Not a thoughtful pause. A full, petrified lockup. My mind was a white noise of despair. I couldn't make the decision. I couldn't perform the simple, physical act of pulling. The light held its breath. Seconds ticked by. 10. 20. A minute. The light didn't waver. It didn't grow impatient. It simply waited, with an infinite, terrible patience. It was waiting for me. In that suspended moment, I felt the entire apartment listening. The shadows in the hallway were no longer just absences of light, they were presences, holding their form, waiting to see if they would be allowed to expand and fill the room. The silence was a held note. I realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with temperature, that the light wasn't just waiting to be turned off. It was waiting for my permission to stop. I had started this. My routine, my reliance, my hesitation. I had given it a role, and now it was waiting for its cue. I was no longer the operator. I was the other actor in the scene. Tears of frustration and sheer, undiluted fear welled in my eyes. I couldn't stand there all night. With a sob that was part gasp, I pulled the chain. Asterisk click. Asterisk the darkness crashed down, but it was not a relief. It felt like a collapse. Like something had been waiting to fall, and I had finally given the order. I am writing this by the glow of my laptop in the dark bedroom. I can see the strip of black that is the kitchen doorway. I know the chain is hanging there, still. The bulb is dormant. But I also know, with a certainty that coils in my gut, that if I walk back in there and raise my hand, it will happen again. The light will wake. And it will wait. It has learned the pause. It has grown fond of the suspense. I am trapped in a dialogue with a force I cannot see, a conversation conducted entirely in hesitations, and the only thing I have to say is, click. But the space between the clicks has become a country, and I am its only citizen, and its only law is waiting. The light holds its breath. And I am slowly, surely, forgetting how to exhale. The fight was a silent one, which was the worst kind. It wasn't about the burnt dinner or the forgotten anniversary, it was about the accumulation of all the unburnt dinners and all the remembered anniversaries that had come and gone without comment. It was a quiet, glacial pressure that finally cracked something between us. She didn't slam the door. She just looked at me from the hallway, her eyes like chips of flint in the lamplight from the living room, and said, "I can't breathe in this house anymore." Then she turned and walked out. I stood in the sudden, ringing silence for a full minute, the words settling like dust. Then something primal kicked in, not love, maybe, but possession, or fear of the vacuum her leaving would create. I ran after her. I burst out of our townhouse onto the quiet, tree-lined street. It was that deep, post-midnight blue hour, the sky between black and dawn, street lamps casting perfect, still pools of sulfur-yellow light on the empty pavement. I saw her already at the end of the block, a speeding silhouette under the last lamp before the turn onto the wider avenue. She was running. Not a jog, but a flat-out, desperate sprint, her coat flapping behind her like a dark wing. I took off after her. My shoes slapped the concrete, loud in the sleeping world. She reached the corner and whipped around it, disappearing. I pushed harder, my lungs burning. As I ran, I became dimly aware that the light was wrong. The street lamps I passed under weren't just illuminating my path. They were, trailing. It wasn't a blur. My vision was clear. But as I passed directly under a lamp, its light didn't fall neatly onto the ground around me and stay there. It streaked. A brilliant, golden smear shot out behind the lamp, arcing through the air like the tail of a comet, pointing back the way I had come. It lingered for a second, a fading scar on the night, before dissolving. It happened with the next one, and the next. With each lamp I passed under, I painted a brief, brilliant line of its light across the darkness, a personal meteor shower marking my frantic pursuit. I had no time to process it. She was ahead. I rounded the corner onto the avenue. It was a long, straight stretch, 4 lanes wide and empty at this hour, lined with tall, mercury vapor lamps that cast a cold, blue-white light. She was a small, dark figure halfway down the block, still running. And the lamps above her were doing it too. But for her, it was different. As she ran under a lamp, the light didn't streak behind her. It streaked ahead. A lance of cold white light would shoot forward from the lamp she was passing, spearing down the avenue, illuminating the next 50 yards of her flight in a stark, momentary flash before fading. The lamp behind her would then dim, as if drained by the effort. She was pulling the light with her, using it to flee, drawing energy from the lamps in her wake to illuminate her escape. Her path was a strobing tunnel of advancing light and retreating shadow. I was chasing her through a storm of stolen illumination. My lamps marked my past. Hers lit her future. The gap between us wasn't closing. If anything, it was growing. She was fueled by the light she pulled ahead, I was merely annotated by the light I left behind. My comet tails were epitaphs. Hers were lifelines. I screamed her name. Ilara. The sound was eaten by the vastness of the empty avenue and the weird, silent physics of the racing light. She didn't look back. She just ran, a figure at the spear point of her own personal dawn, leaving islands of temporary darkness where the lamps had spent their light to push her forward. A terrible understanding dawned on me as I ran, my muscles screaming. This wasn't a chase. It was a visualization. The lamps were making our dynamic literal. She was moving towards something new, pulling all energy and possibility forward with her. I was trapped in the past, my passage only notable for the brief, beautiful streaks I left in my wake, which immediately faded to nothing. I was a memorial. She was a prophecy. We reached the end of the avenue, where it met the river and the old iron bridge. The last lamp on the avenue was above the bridge's entrance. She passed under it. A colossal spear of white light erupted from it, not streaking down the bridge, but arcing up and across the black water, connecting to a distant point on the far shore, a street lamp over there igniting in response, catching the thrown light. She ran onto the bridge, now illuminated by this sustained, thrumming beam of energy that vaulted the river. It was a bridge of light, forged by her need to get away. I stumbled to a halt at the foot of the bridge, gasping, my hands on my knees. I watched her cross. She was a tiny, dark cutout moving through the radiant, humming tunnel. She didn't look down at the water, or back at me. She kept her eyes on the far side, on the waiting glow of that distant lamp. Halfway across, the beam began to fade. The connection wavered. The light from our side's lamp dimmed, guttering. For a heart-stopping second, I thought it would fail, that she would be stranded in the dark middle of the bridge. But she didn't hesitate. She kept running. And as she did, the lamp on the far shore brightened, reaching back, sustaining the connection. She was drawing from her destination now, from the light of the place she was going to. She reached the other side. The beam snapped. The bridge plunged into its customary gloom, just the faint reflection of city light on the water below. The lamp on my side was dead, a cold, dark bulb. The lamp on her side shone steadily, a normal street lamp on a normal street in a part of the city I never visited. She paused under that far lamp, catching her breath. She finally turned. She looked back across the river, across the dark gulf of the bridge. She saw me, a small, panting figure under a dead lamp. She raised a hand. Not a wave. A final, acknowledging gesture. Then she turned and walked away, quickly swallowed by the streets of the other side. I stood there until the sky began to gray with real dawn. The lamps along the avenue slowly, one by one, clicked off as the sun rendered them obsolete. Their comet tails, their spears of light, were gone as if they had never been. The bridge was just iron and wood again. I walked home in the flat, colorless morning light. The magic, or the madness, was over. The street lamps were inert. But I know what I saw. She ran. And the world bent its light to help her escape, because her need was a forward force. My need was a backward glance. I am left in the silence of our house, which now feels less like a home and more like the still point after a meteor has passed, the place where the streak was brightest but is now only a memory in the dark. I turn on the lamps in the evening, but they are just bulbs now. They give light, but they don't breathe, they don't streak, they don't choose. She took that magic with her when she crossed the river, and on this side, there is only the ordinary, unmiraculous dark. The city was a grid of intent, and the traffic lights were its priests. Green for go, red for stop, yellow for the breathless, ambiguous maybe. My life had become a series of maybes. A promotion may be coming. A relationship may be ending. A future may be existing. I moved through the streets in a haze of indecision, my footsteps slower, my gaze perpetually inward. The city's rhythm, which I had once marched to without thought, began to feel like a language I was forgetting how to speak. It started on a Tuesday, at the corner of 7th and Grand. A big, 6-lane intersection with long cycles. I was on foot, approaching the crosswalk as the walk signal glowed its steady, white approval. My mind was elsewhere, chewing on a problem at work that had no clear solution. I reached the curb as the signal began its countdown, 10, 9, 8. I had plenty of time. But I hesitated. Not out of fear, but out of a sudden, profound uncertainty. Asterisk, should I cross? Asterisk, the thought was absurd. Of course I should. I needed to get home. But my body didn't move. I was stuck in the mental quicksand of my own making. 7. 6. And the light changed. Not the pedestrian signal. The traffic light. The green light for the cross traffic, which had been red, flickered. Then it turned a solid, unwavering yellow. A second later, it went red. Our light, for the direction parallel to my crossing, which had been red, turned green. The "don't walk" hand blazed a furious red. All of this happened with 4 seconds still on the walk countdown. I stood, stunned. Cars, obedient to the new green, began to flow past me. The intersection had reorganized itself around my pause. It had seen my hesitation and had adjusted the entire system to accommodate it, to give me time I hadn't asked for, to sanction my indecision with a red hand and a wall of moving metal. A coincidence. A glitch in the city's traffic computer. I shook my head, waited for the next cycle, and crossed when the walk signal returned, my heart beating a little too fast. But it happened again. 2 days later, at a smaller intersection. I was biking. The light was green. I was pedaling towards it, but a flicker of doubt, about my route, about the wobble in my front tire, made me coast, just for a second. The green light ahead of me, as if sensing my loss of momentum, blinked and turned yellow. I hadn't reached the intersection yet. It wasn't timed for my approach. It was timed for my uncertainty. I braked hard, stopping as the light turned red. The cross street got its green. I was left stranded at the line, my hesitation now codified into law by the red glow above me. Now I was watching. I began to test it, at first unconsciously, then with a creeping, horrified intent. If I approached a green light with firm, decisive speed, it stayed green. If I wavered, even slightly, if I checked my phone, if I fumbled with my bag, if I simply let my resolve soften, the light would change. Yellow, then red. It was punishing hesitation. Or perhaps it was protecting me from it. By turning red, it removed the choice. It made my indecision the default state. The city was reading my mind. More specifically, it was reading my commitment. The traffic signals were a network of divining rods, dipping into the stream of my willpower and changing the physical world based on its strength. A strong go was rewarded with green. A week, maybe, was answered with a prohibitive red. It spread from the traffic lights. The automatic doors at the supermarket would hesitate to slide open if I approached with ambivalence. The elevator would chime its arrival just as I was deciding whether to take the stairs. The metro doors would start to close the moment I thought, *maybe I'll wait for the next one. The city's machinery was in a silent, constant dialogue with my decisiveness, and my decisiveness was failing. I became a prisoner of forced certainty. To move through the city, I had to perform conviction. I had to march towards crosswalks with a soldier's gait, stare down green lights with unwavering focus, approach doors with the absolute expectation that they would open. Any lapse, any flicker of internal debate, would be met with immediate, mechanical resistance. A red light. A closing door. A withheld permission. The exhaustion was bone deep. It's one thing to be indecisive. It's another to have your indecision become the governing principle of your physical environment. The world became a funhouse mirror that reflected not my image, but my will, and my will was a cracked and fading thing. The worst was the walk home across the long, signal-controlled bridge. It had a dozen pedestrian crossing lights. One evening, drowning in a particularly profound sea of doubt about everything in my life, I stepped onto the bridge. The first walk signal was on. I took a step, and a wave of uncertainty about the very act of going home hit me. The signal switched to a flashing, "Don't walk," then solid red. I stopped. I stood at the edge of the roaring traffic, feeling the bridge vibrate. I had to wait a full cycle. I gathered myself, fabricated a sense of purpose, and stepped forward as the next walk appeared. I got 3 steps. A thought about my unpaid bills surfaced. The signal ahead, for the next crossing zone, went from white to red. I was trapped in a midway island, cars streaming on both sides. The city had parsed my financial anxiety as a reason to halt my progress. I was being edited in real time, my path chopped into digestible segments based on the purity of my intent. I finally reached the other side after an hour, a journey that should have taken 10 minutes. I was sweating, trembling, utterly spent. The city had forced me to confront every fragmented, hesitant thought, and had erected a red light for each one. I don't go out much now. I order groceries. I work remotely. The outside world has become a labyrinth of tests I am doomed to fail. But the system is inside, too. The light in my room seems to brighten when I'm focused on work, and dim when my attention wanders. The faucet water runs hot when I'm decisive about washing the dishes, cold when I'm doing it out of obligation. The world is no longer a stage. It is a therapist, a relentless, uncaring therapist that reflects every fluctuation of my resolve back at me as a physical constraint. I sit at my window and watch the intersection below. I see people cross with ease, their lights green, their doors opening. They move with a certainty I can only fake for a few seconds at a time. They live in a city of permissions. I live in a city of judgments. And I know, as I watch the lights cycle from green to yellow to red, that they are not on a timer. They are a response to the collective certainty, or uncertainty, of everyone out there. And my own signal, the one that governs the narrow corridor of my existence, is stuck on a permanent, flashing yellow, cautioning a world that is just me, hesitating forever on the curb of my own life, waiting for a green light that will only come when I finally, completely, make up my mind. It was a walk born of pure, mindless flight. The news had come in a sterile email, the kind with polite, HR-approved language that somehow cuts deeper than any shout. The project, my project, the one I'd bled 3 years of my life into, was being sunset. Strategic reprioritization. The words were gray moths fluttering against the screen, eating the meaning out of my career. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stood up from my desk in the open-plan coffin, put on my coat, and walked out. No goodbyes. My body was moving on autopilot, a vessel vacated by any sense of purpose. The city was a blur of gray afternoon, the sky the color of old dishwater. I walked without direction, my feet carrying me away from the glass towers of downtown, into the older, crumbling industrial fringe where the streets were wider, emptier, lined with warehouses with boarded windows and chain-link fences topped with rusting razor wire. The air grew colder, smelling of wet brick and diesel. I walked for an hour, maybe two, my mind a perfect, humming blank. The shock was a novocaine for the soul. I felt nothing. I saw nothing. I only stopped when my legs began to ache, a dull protest from the real world. I was on a long, desolate street that dead-ended at the black, churning water of the river. There was no one around. No cars. Just the distant groan of a barge and the keening of a gull. I leaned against a cold lamppost, its bulb shattered and dark, and finally let the feeling rise. It wasn't sadness. It was a vast, hollow exhaustion, the kind that feels like the air has been sucked out of the universe. I had nothing to go back to. The path ahead was a wall of fog. On an impulse, a stupid, dramatic impulse, I turned around to look at the way I had come. To see the empty path of my retreat. And I saw the light. It wasn't coming from above. It was coming from the ground. My footsteps, the path I had just walked, was illuminated. Not by street lamps, most were broken here, but by the pavement itself. A soft, phosphorescent glow emanated from the exact path I had taken, as if my shoes had been dipped in radiance and left a fading imprint. It was a trail, maybe 3 feet wide, a ribbon of gentle, blue-white light snaking back through the gray urban decay, around corners I had turned, over cracks I had stepped on, all the way back to the horizon of the city center, now just a smudge of taller buildings in the distance. The light wasn't constant. It was brightest where I had most recently walked, fading slowly with distance. But it was unmistakably a record. A luminous cartography of my escape. The places where I had paused, under the broken lamppost, by a graffiti-covered dumpster, showed as brighter, concentrated pools of glow. My aimless wandering was now a defined, glowing line through the world. My breath caught, a sharp intake in the cold air. This was impossible. A hallucination born of stress and exhaustion. I closed my eyes, counted to 10, and opened them. The trail was still there. It had faded a little more, but it was there. A ghost of my passage, written in light. Tentatively, I took a step forward, off the trail, onto the virgin, unwalked pavement to my left. It remained dark, ordinary asphalt. I stepped back onto my luminous path. The glow seemed to warm the soles of my feet through my shoes, a gentle, welcoming pulse. The path was not just a record. It was active. It was acknowledging my return to it. A wild, desperate hope flared in my chest. A path. A literal, illuminated path. Maybe it wasn't showing me where I'd been. Maybe it was showing me the way back. Back to the office? Back to my life? It was a thread through the labyrinth, a trail of breadcrumbs made of light. All I had to do was follow it back the way I came. I turned and began to walk, retracing my glowing steps. The light seemed to brighten under my feet as I walked, as if being reinforced by my return journey. It felt good. It felt certain. For the first time in hours, I had direction. I followed it past the graffiti dumpster, around the corner onto a slightly busier street. Here, the glow of my path intersected with the ordinary orange of a working street lamp. They didn't mix. My path glowed through the other light, a separate, more personal signature. I walked faster, my heart lifting. This was a sign. A bizarre, impossible sign, but a sign nonetheless. The universe was marking my way. It was saying, asterisk, this is your route. Follow it home. Asterisk, I followed it for 20 blocks, back into the bleaker edges of downtown. The glow led me to the mouth of a narrow, foul-smelling alley between 2 office buildings. This was part of my original, mindless route. I'd cut through here. The alley was dark, dripping, the glow of my path a welcome guide through the grime. It led to the other side, back onto a sidewalk. And then it stopped. Not faded. Stopped. The luminous path ended in a perfect, sharp line at the edge of the sidewalk, right where I had emerged from the alley during my initial flight. Ahead lay the normal, unilluminated pavement leading back to my office tower, visible now just 2 blocks away. But my glowing trail did not go there. It ended here, at the point where my panicked walk had begun to slow, where the numbness had fully set in. I stood at the terminus of the light, staring at the dark pavement ahead. I took a step forward, off the glow. Nothing. No new light appeared. I stepped back onto the end of the trail. It brightened softly. The message was suddenly, horrifyingly clear. The path didn't mark the way back to my old life. It marked the route of my escape from it. It was a monument to my retreat, not a guide for my return. It illuminated the flight, not the destination. The trail ended here because this was where the conscious decision to flee had ended, where I had dissolved into pure, directionless autopilot. The light was a highlight reel of my surrender. I looked back the way I had come. The ribbon of light stretched back through the alley, through the bleak streets, all the way to the river's edge where I had faced the void. It was beautiful, in a tragic way. A saint's halo of failure. A perfect map of how far I had run. Now, I am stranded at the end of the light. Behind me is a beautiful, glowing road to nowhere, to a river of despair. Ahead of me is the dark, unmarked path back to a life that has no place for me. The illumination is behind me. It only exists where I have already been, where I have already given up. I am standing at the border between a brilliantly lit past of escape and a future of profound, unlit uncertainty. The path is not a guide. It is a judgment. It says, you ran this far. This is the shape of your defeat. It is so clear, so visible, that it literally glows. And now you must decide, do you step off the map into the dark, or do you turn around and walk the lovely, luminous road back to the edge of the river, and see what happens when you follow a path of light to its absolute, final end? The rain was a whispered secret against the window panes, a steady, gray hush that had gone on for days. The world outside my 4th floor walk-up was a watercolor of blurred streetlights and slick, black pavement. I was at the window, not because I wanted to be, but because the silence in the apartment had grown teeth, and the rain was a softer kind of quiet. That's when I saw her. A woman, standing perfectly still under the street lamp directly across from my building. The lamp was an old one, cast iron with a frosted glass globe, the kind that casts a soft, diffused glow rather than a harsh beam. She was just within its circle, wearing a dark coat, her head slightly bowed, as if studying the wet reflections at her feet. She wasn't waiting for anyone. She wasn't looking at a phone. She was simply, standing. A statue of contemplation in the downpour. I watched her, as one does when the world narrows to a single, framed scene. A minute passed. 2. The rain matted her hair to her forehead, dripped from the hem of her coat. She didn't shiver. She didn't move. Then, the bulb hummed. It wasn't the normal, barely audible electrical buzz of an old street lamp. This was a tone. A low, resonant, vibrational hum that seemed to emanate from the glass itself, a sound felt in the teeth more than heard by the ears. And within that hum, a word. A name. Eleanor. It was clear. Unmistakable. A vocalization born of vibrating filament and glass, but shaped into a phonetic truth. Eleanor. The woman under the lamp, Eleanor, did not look up. She gave no sign of having heard. She simply took a slow, deep breath, her shoulders rising and falling, as if in response to a question only she had been asked. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain-dark alley next to the bakery. The hum ceased. The lamp was just a lamp again, shedding its silent, soggy light on an empty patch of sidewalk. I stood frozen at the window, my own breath held. A hallucination. The product of a lonely mind and too many hours listening to the white noise of rain. I repeated it to myself until it felt true. I made tea, turned on all the lights, tried to read. But the sound echoed in the bone dome of my skull. Eleanor. The next night, the rain had stopped, leaving a fresh, cold clarity. Almost against my will, I found myself at the window as dusk fell. The street lamp flickered on at its appointed time. And at 8:17 p.m. she returned. Same dark coat. Same posture. She took up her position under the lamp, a fixture returning to its setting. I watched, my heart a dull, heavy drum. I counted the seconds. At 1 minute and 43 seconds, the hum began. It built, lower and more resonant than before, a cello note played on a power line. And within it, woven into the fabric of the sound, Eleanor. Again, she didn't acknowledge it audibly. But this time, I saw her eyes close. A slow, deliberate closing, as if listening to a piece of beautiful, heartbreaking music. She stood there for the duration of the hum, maybe 10 seconds, her face a mask of profound, weary acceptance. When the sound faded, she opened her eyes, turned, and left. Not into the alley this time, but down the street, her footsteps silent on the damp concrete. This was no hallucination. The street lamp knew her. It spoke to her. And she listened. I became a chronicler of this nightly ritual. She came at different times, but always after dark, and always for a duration between 90 seconds and 3 minutes. The lamp would hum her name. Sometimes it was a sighing, sorrowful Eleanor. Once, it was sharp, almost admonishing. Another time, it was a question, the pitch rising at the end, Eleanor? It was a conversation. A one-sided, sonic conversation between a woman and a municipal light source. Who was she? What was the lamp saying? Was it reminding her? Summoning her? Judging her? I scoured local obituaries for an Eleanor. I asked the elderly couple who ran the bakery if they knew an Eleanor. They shook their heads, their eyes bland and uninterested. She was a ghost, but only to me. To the lamp, she was utterly, vocally real. The compulsion to understand became an itch under my skin. One evening, I did the unthinkable. I left my apartment just before her usual time. I crossed the street and stood in the deep shadow of the bakery awning, 20 feet from the lamp post. The air was cold. I felt like a trespasser in a private sacrament. Right on time, she appeared. She didn't look left or right. She walked to her spot under the lamp and went still. The street was quiet. I held my breath. The hum began. It was different up close. It vibrated in my sternum, a physical pressure. And the name, when it came, was not a mere word. It was a capsule of emotion. This time, it was drenched in a regret so deep it felt geological. Eleanor. And she spoke back. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the fading hum, but I heard it. Just 2 words, breathed up towards the glowing glass. I know. Then she left. She walked right past my shadowed nook. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met mine. There was no surprise, no anger. Just a depth of exhaustion that mirrored the regret in the lamp's hum. She knew I was watching. She knew I heard. And she didn't care. My witnessing was as irrelevant as the rain. I didn't follow her. I went back to my window. The mystery was solved, and the solution was worse than any fantasy. The lamp wasn't a supernatural entity. It was a resonance. It was humming the frequency of her own guilt, her own memory, her own fixed idea. She stopped under that specific lamp because something had happened there. A last meeting. A final word. A terrible decision. The emotional charge of that moment had baked itself into the place, and the old, receptive technology of the street lamp, the glass, the filament, the humming transformer, had absorbed it. It played the tape back whenever she came near, vibrating with the echo of a past so heavy it had become a sound. She returned every night to hear it. To stand in the aura of her own mistake and listen to its name. It was her penance. Her nightly confirmation, yes, you are still Eleanor. Yes, it still happened. I watch her still. Every night. She stands under the lamp. It hums her name, with all its shades of meaning, accusation, lament, a simple, terrible fact. She whispers, I know. And then she leaves, carrying the sound with her into the dark. I understand now. We all have our street lamps. Places that hum our names back to us in the voice of our own regrets. Most of us just walk past them, or live in cities with new, silent LED lights that have no memory. But she found hers. A living monument to a single, defining moment. And she visits it, to remember, to be remembered, to feel the vibration of her own life's most painful note in the glass and the iron and the light. I will never know what she did, or what was done to her. I only know that the bulb hums her name. And she stops to listen. And in that exchange, there is a whole, devastating history, illuminated for no one but her, and for me, the accidental, lonely witness in the window across the street. The walk to work was a trance, a muscle memory procession through the same 6 blocks of downtown. Past the bank with its polished granite, the pharmacy with its eternal, sale, signs, the empty storefronts with, for lease, ghosts in the windows. My mind was always elsewhere, already at my desk, already mired in the spreadsheet or the email queue waiting for me. The shop windows were just barriers, things to walk past. I never looked in. Then, on a Wednesday, my shoe came untied. I cursed under my breath, bent down on the sidewalk in front of Miller's haberdashery, a dusty, old-fashioned men's clothier that never seemed to have any customers. As I fumbled with the laces, my eyes, cast downward, caught the reflection in the polished brass of the doorframe. It showed the interior of the shop. But it wasn't the interior of today. In the reflection, I saw myself. From yesterday. I was standing at the counter inside Miller's, wearing the same gray coat I had on now. I was holding a dark blue necktie up to the light, a thoughtful frown on my face. The old shopkeeper, Mr. Miller, was smiling behind the counter, his hands clasped. I watched my reflection self nod, pull out a wallet, and hand over cash. A transaction from yesterday, perfectly preserved in today's brass. My fingers froze on my shoelace. I slowly straightened up and turned to look directly into the shop window. Today's window. It displayed the usual artful arrangement of silk ties and folded pocket squares on a velvet stand. Through the glass, the shop interior was dim, empty. Mr. Miller was in the back, invisible. There was no version of me inside. I shook my head, a hard, physical motion to dislodge the nonsense. A trick of the light, a mental replay sparked by fatigue. I finished tying my shoe and hurried on, a cold unease prickling the back of my neck. But the next day, it happened again. I was waiting for the crosswalk signal in front of the Daily Grind, the coffee shop where I bought my overpriced latte every morning. I glanced idly at the window. And I didn't see the usual chalkboard menu or the display of branded mugs. I saw a scene from inside the shop, from approximately 8:15 a.m. yesterday. There I was, at the counter, fumbling for my loyalty card while the barista, a girl named Chloe with a septum piercing, waited with a patient, dead-eyed smile. I saw myself spill a little sugar on the counter, brush it away with an awkward swipe of my hand. The scene was silent, vivid, and perfectly mundane. It was my yesterday, playing on a loop behind the glass. The walk signal chimed. I didn't move. I stared. The scene continued until my reflection self walked out of frame with the coffee cup. Then it reset. My fumbling, the spilling sugar, the patient smile. A 3-minute slice of my previous day, endlessly recurring. I stepped closer, my breath fogging the glass. The moment my fog obscured the view, the scene vanished. When I wiped the glass clear, it was back to the normal display of mugs and bags of beans. No yesterday. No me. It became a dreadful game. I started testing it. The windows only showed the scenes if I looked at them indirectly, or with a certain unfocused gaze. If I stared directly, purposefully, I saw the present-day display. But if I let my eyes relax, if I caught the reflection at the right angle, or looked just past the surface, the past would bleed through. And it was always my past. My yesterdays. The bank window showed me withdrawing $60 at 4:52 p.m. the day before. The pharmacy window replayed my purchase of allergy medicine, my awkward interaction with the clerk about coupons. The vacant for lease window, which should have shown nothing but dust and emptiness, displayed a haunting scene, me, from last Thursday, pausing in front of it to check my phone, my face lit by the screen, looking lost and tired. Even the polished side mirror of a parked delivery truck showed me walking past it the previous afternoon, my tie blowing over my shoulder in the wind. The city was not showing me its history. It was showing me mine. A curated museum of my own insignificant life, playing on every reflective surface. My private banalities were the featured exhibit. The horror was in the specificity, and the isolation. No one else saw it. I'd stand transfixed before a window replaying my clumsy exit from the dry cleaners, while pedestrians flowed around me, seeing only coats on mannequins. I was a ghost haunting my own memories, forced to watch a life that felt simultaneously familiar and alien. I saw the tension in my shoulders I hadn't known I carried. The false, tight smile I gave to passing acquaintances. The way I always touched the same lamppost for luck. A life of tiny, unconscious rituals, now rendered in high-definition replay. I began to avoid my own route. I took different streets, where I had no history. Those windows behaved normally. They showed their own presence, or nothing at all. The phenomenon was tied to my personal geography. The city was holding up a mirror to the paths I wore thin with repetition, saying, *look. This is what you do. This is all you do. Yesterday, I broke. I stood in front of the bakery window at the end of my block. I let my gaze go soft. The scene emerged, me, from yesterday evening, buying a solitary loaf of sourdough. I watched my tired face, the way I didn't meet the baker's eyes, the slump of my posture. A portrait of quiet despair. The scene looped. Buy the bread, leave. Buy the bread, leave. On an impulse I didn't understand, I raised my hand and knocked on the glass. Gently. Tap, tap, tap. In the reflected yesterday, my walking away figure stopped. It turned around. It, looked back at the bakery window. Not at the baker, but at the window itself. At the point where, in its timeline, a knock had just sounded from the future. Our eyes met, through the layers of time and glass. The yesterday me looked confused, then startled. Then afraid. The scene shattered. The window showed only crusty baguettes and berry tarts. I haven't slept. If the windows show my yesterdays, what did I just do? Did I alter my own past? Did I introduce a moment of inexplicable fear into a mundane evening? Or was that always part of the memory, and I'm only now seeing it because I've become sensitive to the full record? I am afraid to go outside. But I am more afraid to stay in. Because my apartment has windows. And if I don't look directly at them, if I let my focus slide, what will I see playing in the glass? A scene from yesterday of me sitting here, paralyzed? Or a scene from tomorrow, of an empty chair. The city has become a hall of mirrors, all reflecting the same lonely story, a step out of phase. I am no longer living my life. I am attending its daily screening, and the critic inside me is ruthless, and the show is always the same, and there is no leaving the theater. The shortcut was a form of rebellion, a small, daily, no, to the prescribed grid of the city. It was a passageway between two old brick warehouses, so narrow my shoulders nearly brushed the walls, perpetually damp and smelling of moss and forgotten things. It saved me exactly 4 minutes on my walk home from the bus stop, 4 minutes I would otherwise spend under the endless, watchful gaze of street lamps. For 3 years, it was my secret. A slice of contained, predictable night in the middle of the illuminated world. The darkness there was a friend. A silent, non-judgmental space to let the mask of the day slip, to breathe air that wasn't shared with anyone else. The change was not gradual. It was absolute. One Tuesday, everything was as it had always been. I stepped off the bright sidewalk of 5th Street, into the familiar mouth of the passage. The transition was always immediate, the sounds of traffic muffled, the temperature dropping a few degrees, the world narrowing to a slit of sky overhead and the faint, greasy light from windows high up on the warehouse walls. That light was always there, a constant. It didn't illuminate the ground, but it defined the space, painted the brick in tones of deep orange and soot black. That Tuesday, I took 5 steps in. And the high windows went out. Not a flicker. Not a power cut. A unanimous, deliberate extinguishing. One moment they were there, scattered squares of sickly yellow. The next, they were black. The darkness that fell was not the gentle dark of a familiar room at night. It was a substance. It poured into the passageway like oil, thick and complete, swallowing the texture of the bricks, the ground under my feet, even the sound of my own breath. It was a darkness that had been waiting, pooled just out of sight, and had chosen this exact moment to rush in and claim its territory. I stopped dead. My heart gave a single, enormous kick against my ribs. This was wrong. This was a different darkness. It had weight. It had intention. It wasn't the absence of light, it was the presence of something else that light had been holding back. I took a step back, my hand flying out to touch the cold, wet brick wall for orientation. My fingers found nothing. The wall was gone. Or rather, the idea of wall had been swallowed by the pure, undifferentiated black. I froze again, panic rising in my throat like bile. I was standing in a void. There was no up, no down, no forward, no back. Just the dark. I forced myself to breathe. It's just a power outage. A coincidence. The walls are there. Just walk. I took a cautious step forward, the way I had been heading, towards the far end of the passage that should open onto Carson Avenue. My foot came down on nothing. There was no ground. I stumbled, flailing, expecting to fall, but I didn't. I was suspended. The darkness held me. It wasn't empty space, it was a medium, like being submerged in ink. I tried to turn around, to retreat the 4 steps back to 5th Street. But which way was back? There were no reference points. The darkness had erased the geometry of the world. I was in the center of a perfect, spherical night. A sob escaped my lips, a tiny, pathetic sound that was absorbed instantly, without echo. Then, I felt it. A pressure. Not on my skin, but on my place. The sense that the darkness was not just around me, but was considering me. A focus. It was waiting. It had turned the corner with me, or perhaps it had been the corner all along, and I had finally stepped fully inside it. Time lost meaning. There was no way to measure it. There was only the waiting dark and the hammering of my own blood in my ears. I thought of the street lamp on 5th Street, just yards away. I thought of Carson Avenue, with its late-night traffic. They were universes away. This darkness was a pocket dimension, a trap that had been set on my path, baited with my own need for a shortcut. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like hours. It felt like the blink of an eye. Survival instinct, worn thin, finally sparked. I couldn't see, so I had to feel. I dropped to my knees, my hands scrabbling ahead of me. My palms scraped against rough, wet asphalt. The ground was there. The relief was so profound it was a pain in my chest. I crawled, one hand always on the ground, the other reaching out until it smacked against the cold, solid, blessedly real brick of the wall. I had found a border. An edge of the void. I crawled along that wall, my cheek pressed against its gritty, damp surface like a lover. I crawled for what felt like miles. The darkness remained absolute. There was no light at the end of the tunnel because the tunnel itself had ceased to exist. I was crawling through the idea of a passage. My outstretched hand, sliding along the brick, suddenly met empty space. Not the textureless void of the center, but a change. An opening. A corner. I had reached the other end. But there was no Carson Avenue. No light. Just more darkness, perhaps a different kind. I huddled in the angle of the two walls, trembling, a rat in a pitch-black maze. It was the sound that saved me. Or doomed me. From the direction I had come, the 5th Street direction, I heard a scrape. Then a footstep. Then another. Someone else was entering the passage. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed over me, hope for another human, and a terror for them that was even greater than my terror for myself. I tried to shout a warning, but my voice was a dry rasp. Stop. Don't come in. The footsteps paused. Then they continued, cautious but determined. A pinprick of light appeared, bobbing. A phone flashlight. It was a man, maybe in his 50s, wearing a delivery uniform. He swept the weak beam around, it catching the brick walls, the puddles, the ceiling. A normal passageway. He saw me, huddled and wild-eyed in the corner. "You all right, mate?" he asked, his voice echoing normally in the confined space. I stared at him, then at the beam of his light. It illuminated the world I knew. The bricks, the puddles, the far opening onto Carson Avenue, where the glow of streetlights was clearly visible. The waiting darkness was gone. Completely. As if it had never been. I stammered something about feeling faint. He helped me up, guided me out onto Carson Avenue. The light and noise of the city were a violent assault. I thanked him, my voice shaking, and he went on his way with a concerned backward glance. I have not taken the shortcut since. I walk the long way, under the endless street lamps. But the memory of that darkness is not a memory of fear. It's a memory of presence. It wasn't empty. It was full. Of what, I don't know. But it was waiting. And I think it waits still, in that passage, or in other corners, other transitions from light to shadow. It is a darkness that is not a lack, but a thing itself. And I know, with a cold certainty, that one night, on some other corner, under some other excuse of a shortcut, I will turn again. And it will be there. Not because it follows me, but because it is the true nature of the turn, the hidden face of the corner itself, and I am just one of the few who has stumbled into its waiting silence. It began in the silence that follows a final word. Not an argument, but an ending. The last piece of furniture was gone, the last box taped shut. The apartment was an empty shell echoing with the ghost of our voices. Sarah stood by the door, her keys in her hand, my keys, now. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed on some middle distance, the place people look when they are already gone. Then, just before she turned to leave, she glanced up. Not at me. Out the window, across the air shaft, at the blank, dark windows of the building opposite. And in one of those windows, on the 4th floor, directly in her side, a light came on. It wasn't a gradual brightening. It was a snap. A sudden, warm, yellow rectangle of light appearing in the grid of black. A single, lit window, perfectly framed in our own dark pane. It held for 3 seconds, then snapped off. Sarah didn't seem to notice. She turned, opened the door, and walked out without a sound. The door clicked shut. I was alone. But I had seen it. The correlation was too precise. Her glance upward, a somatic punctuation to our finale, and the distant window answering. A silent signal. An acknowledgement. I told myself it was a timer. A coincidental occupant returning home, flicking a switch. But the timing was conversational. It felt like a response. I stayed in the empty apartment that night, too drained to move. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, and stared out the window at the building opposite. It was a mirror of this one, old red brick, fire escapes like metal lace. Most windows were dark. A few had the blue flicker of televisions. The 4th floor window, the one that had lit, was dark again. I watched it until my eyes burned. Nothing. In the morning, I started packing my own remnants. The process was mechanical, hollow. At one point, carrying a stack of books, I felt a wave of such profound loneliness it buckled my knees. I sank down, my back against the bookshelf, and looked out the window, not at anything, just into the gray daylight. My eyes, unfocused, landed on a 5th floor window across the way. As my gaze touched it, it lit up. A soft, bedside lamp kind of light. It stayed on for the duration of my gaze, maybe 10 seconds, and when I blinked, shook my head, and looked away, it went out. Coincidence became pattern, became obsession. The building opposite was not a collection of apartments. It was a switchboard. And my emotional state was the current. I began to test it, with the grim diligence of a lab rat in a maze of its own grief. A surge of anger at a memory, a slammed cupboard door, a bitter thought, and a window on the 2nd floor would flash, a sharp, white kitchen light. A pang of regret so sweet it was almost pleasurable, and a dim, amber glow would kindle in a 3rd floor pane, lingering like the scent of old perfume. The windows didn't just turn on. They matched. The quality of the light, its duration, its intensity, all of it seemed calibrated to the nuance of my feeling. It was a one-way dialogue. My internal weather was being reported across the air shaft in real time. The building was my mood ring, my externalized nervous system rendered in brick and glass and 60-watt bulbs. I stopped packing. Why leave? This was the most honest relationship I'd ever had. I would feel, and the building would acknowledge. No judgment, no platitudes, no failed comfort. Just light. It saw me. Truly saw me, in a way Sarah never had, in a way no person could. I spent days in the empty space, conducting my symphony of sorrow. I'd conjure a specific memory, our first vacation, the fight over her mother, the quiet Tuesday evenings that were the best and now the most painful, and watch the windows respond. A constellation of grief would ignite across the facade, a bright, brief flare for anger, a long, slow dimming for sadness, a rapid, stuttering flicker for anxiety. The building was my biography written in light. Then, I tried to manipulate it. I forced a happy memory, a generic one, sunshine, ice cream, no person attached. I stared at the building, beaming the thought outward. The windows remained dark. I tried nostalgia, a bittersweet remembrance of a childhood home. A single, weak, yellowish light glowed on the ground floor and died. It only worked with the raw, Sarah-related material. The building was a specialist. It only spoke the language of this one, specific loss. The horror, when it came, was quiet. It was the realization that I was running out of unique feelings. I was recycling the memories, and the windows were starting to repeat themselves. The same second-floor kitchen light for the same old anger. The same third-floor amber glow for the well-worn regret. I was in a loop. My grief was becoming routine, and the building's responses were the reruns. I needed a new feeling. A final one. The feeling of letting go. I sat before the window at dusk. I didn't try to summon anything. I just released. I imagined the memories, not as wounds, but as objects. I placed them, one by one, in a box in my mind. The good, the bad, the brutal, the tender. I didn't shove them in, I laid them to rest. I felt the weight of the box, and then I imagined setting it down. Not throwing it away. Just setting it down. As I did, every window on the facing building that had ever lit for me, dozens of them, illuminated at once. It was a silent, spectacular explosion of light. Every floor, every corner of the grid, blazed with a different quality: warm yellow, cold white, soft blue, vivid orange. The entire facade was a mosaic of my spent emotions, a final, grand retrospective. It was beautiful. It was devastating. It lasted for one long, held breath. Then, starting from the edges, the lights began to wink out. Not in unison, but in a slow, peaceful wave, like a city going to sleep, or a brain quieting after a storm of thought. Within a minute, the building was dark. Completely, uniformly dark. Not a single television flicker, not a reading lamp. A total blackout. And it has remained dark. For 3 nights now. I still sit here. I try to feel something, anything, to provoke a response. Anger, sadness, a flicker of something new. But I am empty. The well is dry. The building is silent. The dialogue is over. I am left in the quiet. The most profound silence I have ever known. I had grown accustomed to the conversation, to the instant, visual validation of my pain. Now there is only the blank, dark face of the building, and my own echoless heart. She glanced up, and a window lit, acknowledging the end. I have let go, and now all the windows are dark, acknowledging nothing. The conversation is finished. And I have never been more alone.
Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.